Well, good morning everyone. We are here bright and early in sunny Northam, and we have a little aeroplane in front of us. We'll do a little bit of a walk and talk about it, and then we'll jump inside and go do some aviating. I kind of wanted to start on the outside of the aeroplane because there's a lot of, as Doug DeMuro would say, quirks and features of the aircraft. So this is a Beechcraft Sundowner 23. It's quite an early model. This guy here is an early 60s variant. It's got a 160 horsepower engine up front with a fixed pitch prop, and I also have a puppy. So the aircraft also, I'll show you the tail in a second. So I just kind of want to give you a walk around the outside of the airplane, because the outside of the aircraft does tell you quite a bit about the machine, and it's kind of hard without a person beside it, but it's a very large aircraft for a 160 horsepower engine. It's maybe the first thing that you notice about the aircraft is actually just how big it is. The cabin is actually monstrous, just absolutely cavernous, and it's one of the really big strong points of the aircraft is just how big the cabin is. You can fit just about anything in there. It is very roomy, it's very big. It's quite a good cabin, but I'll show you a little bit of that from the inside. I'll show you the flaps here in a minute. The next thing, let's start at let's do the fancy thing, and we'll start as if we're a pilot at the front of the aircraft, because every walk around should start in the same point. I think this is my contender for the worst tail art ever put on an aircraft. It is absolutely horrible. So my usual first starting point for any walk around is usually the pilot door, which would be the left side of the aircraft. In this case, it's going to be the right side of the airplane. We do a bit of a walk around from there. So one of the good parts about the aircraft in real life is the ability to see the whole engine. So during your walk around, we got this giant flap here, and there's one of these on either side of the aircraft. And as you can see, you've got a lot of access to the engine to be able to do an inspection on your walk around. You can also see the nose wheel down the bottom, look for any major oil leaks or anything like that. This exhaust has not been installed properly. That's the first thing I've noticed. This exhaust is not installed correctly. Yeah, but you can see the mags, you can see the oil filter. You know, you can have a look and make sure that the oil filter's got lock wire on it. See up on top of the engine. One of the strong points of the aircraft, again, is the maintenance side of things. It's a relatively cheap aircraft to maintain, and there's not a lot of stuff in the way. So yeah, maybe this is another good point to have a look just straight down the front of the airplane. The wingspan on it is also surprisingly large. It's got quite a very large wingspan for the size of aircraft. That's actually one of the downsides for the plane is I'll be able to demonstrate that in flight rather than trying to talk about it on the ground. You'll see it's got quite a large dihedral. So it actually flies really nice, but it's got quite a large dihedral of the wings. You know, that's like nearly 5 degrees, I would say, just eyeballing it. So in flight, it's actually a very nice and stable airplane. Very Beechcraft in how it flies. The front nose wheel, this is where the problem starts showing up, is the undercarriage. So all of the undercarriage is trailing link undercarriage, except for some reason they thought it would be a good idea to put rubber pucks in all of the undercarriage. So the rubber pucks live under that sort of cover there. And well, the thing acts like a spring. So on the ground, it doesn't feel like a good aeroplane. It feels like you're sitting in a golf cart without any suspension. You just kind of wobble around and bounce around, and it just doesn't feel good. So even though it has this trailing link undercarriage, it doesn't, in theory, it works really well. You know, as we all know, that, you know, trailing link undercarriage is the optimum choice, but on this particular aeroplane, it doesn't work. So the main gear is the same. You can see over there on the other side, big trailing link undercarriage. But inside of this This cover here is where there's these rubber pucks. And so one of the problems with the aircraft is on landing, the aircraft has a tendency to bounce, and it can bounce a lot. It really goes into a porpoise kangaroo kind of like thing, and if you don't get it right. But why it does that is not actually down to the undercarriage. Like anything in aviation, it's a combination of things, and this aircraft is a good study for someone wanting to learn about problems with aircraft design, is how a few small little problems can all grow together to make one larger problem, which is, you know, the aircraft general safety or general public perception, and this airplane is an example of that. So the undercarriage isn't necessarily the problem, but it's really hard to describe just looking at it. We're going to show it in flight, but let's go ahead and have a look at the tail. The tail is another point of contention. So again, on paper, this sounds like a really good idea. We have an all-moving stabilator. An all-moving stabilator, which should give you a lot of elevator authority, right? The whole stabilator moves with a balance tab. And so the balance tab adds a whole heap of weight to the flight control. So you can see it's the tab, how it moves up in the same direction as the elevator, and that's so it adds weight to the flight controls, and that's usually to dampen any pilot oscillations or the pilot wobbling around on the stick. One of the problems, however, I'm going to show you when I deploy the flaps. At certain angles of attack, the flap and the wing completely blank the elevator. And when that happens, it's actually right about stall. So it's right about the stalling alpha, where the flaps and the wing, they produce so much turbulence and so much blanking force that it actually completely covers the tail. I should be able to show that today. It's nice and cool, so it should be stable enough for me to be able to demonstrate some right on stalling alpha and just show you that the elevator doesn't work. And then the other one, the other flight control that stops working at high alpha, is actually the rudder. And so if you can imagine, the aircraft here is not at its stalling alpha. Obviously it's sitting on the ground, but if I go ahead and maybe try and move the camera so it looks like the stalling alpha, imagine the relative airflow is coming straight at the camera. That giant fuselage that is really good for cabin space and all those other things, well, have a look how much of the tail is poking above it. There's almost no tail poking above the fuselage. So the fuselage and wings, they produce this giant blanking effect of this whole tailplane empennage area. And that results in a loss of rudder authority and a loss of elevator authority right at the stalling alpha. And so, well, if you're a pilot and you're trying to land this aircraft and you're trying to land it like every other GA aircraft you've been taught, which is stall the aircraft onto the runway, you're going to crash. Literally, you're just going to crash. And that's not good. And you go, well, okay, that's not too bad. What are these other problems? Well, the other problem comes down to the center of gravity. So this aircraft, as it sits right now, the center of gravity is actually forward of the forward limit. So let's just work with me here and talk through it. I'll go ahead and show you the center of gravity charts, but every other GA aircraft, 172s, Cherokees, things like that, you can put 2 humans in the front seat, go 3/4 tanks of fuel, and you don't have to worry about anything. Don't bother opening up the weight and balance chart. That's not a suggestion, that's just what happens. Is you can jump in the aircraft, put people in it, and away you go. If you do that in this aeroplane, you're going to crash and die. If you put 2 people in the front that weigh collectively anywhere from 220 kilos or above, you're actually forward of the forward center of gravity limit. So couple a very forward center of gravity with a elevator that runs out of authority at high alpha and a rudder that runs out of high alpha. So with a really, really, really forward CG, You run out of elevator earlier because there's not enough elevator to deal with the extra weight forward of the center of gravity. Now you have a real problem, because how are you going to land the aircraft if you can't raise the nose? Well, now you're going to have a problem where the aircraft porpoises down the runway and then it smashes. Why does it smash? Well, the undercarriage offers absolutely zero suspension because it's just rubber. And what ends up happening with these aircraft when you're looking at buying these things, this aircraft has been repaired previously because it had a landing incident, is the undercarriage here, well, the rubber does nothing to suspend any kind of hard landing. Well, don't mind my dog in the background. The undercarriage there, well, it ends up smashing up into the wing spar, and you can actually see some of that damage on this aeroplane. Is if I come up nice and close here, this is where the actual main undercarriage attaches. And this top skin has a little bit of damage on it. It's all been repaired. Hopefully you'll be able to see it, but there's a little bit of rippling and stuff like that there. Now the actual spar's fine, and so is the top of the skin. All that was repaired in 1995. But because there's no dampening, the undercarriage is attached to the main spar, well, it just fucking rips the wing out of the aircraft, or at least damages it and bends it. And that was one of the problems with this aircraft, is that this forward attach fitting, so there's a forward spar that's mounted right about in there, and that forward spar, it was completely detached from the inside of the fuselage, so the whole wing could twist. So the aircraft had to have that repaired, of course. So there's some of the problems. What adds to all of this as well is the deck angle and the view out the front of the aeroplane. It's hard to see here, but if you have a look at the cowling here, notice how it's slanted up like that. Well, with every other general aviation aircraft in the world, that slant doesn't exist. I could go walk over to just about every one of these other aircraft that are on the flight line, and I can see a 152, a Comanche, all these other things. So what this angle does, let me see if I can get my finger in the way again. Excuse me, camera. What this angle does is it actually gives you a visual illusion that your angle of attack is actually lower or higher than what you think it is. So on landing, it ends up making the pilot tend to think that they have a higher angle of attack than what they actually have. I don't know if I said that right the first time. So you could imagine then, as the aircraft tilts, is if you line that cowling up with the runway, well, you've actually still got a lot more to raise the nose. Couple that with a deck angle. So what I mean by a deck angle is the actual line of the fuselage is actually angled up like that. The nose is angled down. You end up with this visual illusion as a pilot that you're already at the flare height. And you'll see this in flight as well. In level flight, the nose is actually lower than the main gear. This nose tire in level flight is actually about this far lower than the main gear. So you're flying along for an hour, you get very, very, very used to the view out the front of the aircraft, and then you come back to the airport and try and land. Then you land nose wheel first, you bounce down the runway, and then all of those other problems come in, where you run out of elevator at stalling alpha, you run out of rudder, so all of your directional control is lost, pitch control is lost, and if you fucked up and you didn't bother looking at the weight and balance and figuring out how much weight is in the front of the aeroplane, well, you're in for a really bad time. So some of you are probably watching this going, fuck, why would you even buy the airplane? And well, the thing is with aircraft is pilots now are very, very, you know, we're lucky. I don't know if you'll see it. We're lucky when we have aircraft like the Comanche and the 152. They do all of the flying for you. You don't really have to think about it. You wobble the stick around and the aircraft does exactly what you want it to do. With this airplane, you actually have to be a pilot and read the POH. Who would have thought? You actually have to care about the aircraft, you have to care about the weight and balance, and there's just not a lot of pilots, I'm being honest here, there's just not a lot of pilots that actually care that much. There's not a lot that actually would go to the effort of doing a real close look at the weight and balance of the airplane and say, hey, what load can I actually take? So when I delivered this plane to the new owner, I explained to him, you know, I had a real good look at the weight and balance when I was doing the test flight program on it, and I explained to him that, like, dude, like, every time you fly this plane, put 10 or 20 kilos of stuff in the back of the aircraft. If you're flying with 2 people, you need at least, at a minimum, 10 kilos in the baggage compartment. Ideally, you want 20 to 25 kilos. You do that, you actually bring the weight and balance back into a decent range. But now you're giving up weight. You're having to put 25 kilos in the back to be able to actually fly the airplane. 25 kilos, you know, that's a lot of fuel. You know, it's nearly an hour of fuel in this airplane. Well, it is an hour of fuel in this airplane. But if you're only putting 2 people in the front, you have to put weight in the back. And if we go have a look in here, the owner has very, very smartly listened to my advice, and this aircraft doesn't go anywhere unless it has 10 litres of water in the back of the plane. Notice how it's at the very aft of the baggage area, not at the forward bit. And again, most general aviation aircraft, you're trying to put as much weight forward as you can, because the aircraft usually runs out of aft CG before it runs out of forward CG. With this aeroplane, it's the other way around, and that's abnormal. That is abnormal, and because it's abnormal and pilots are too fucking lazy to read the POH and understand it, you end up with an aircraft that has a higher incident rate than what you would expect. So, yeah. Let's have a quick look inside the aircraft. Now, this baggage area is absolutely huge. Let's talk about the good things. This baggage area, I can fit 63 kilos of stuff back here. That's a lot, and I can fit my whole body. Let's have a look inside the cabin, and you'll notice back seat, monstrous. Front seats, monstrous. We even have a little hat shelf back here. The cabin is truly, truly huge for this category of aircraft. It is absolutely monstrous. That's all there is to it. It's got a great big entry door on the side here. You can see this aircraft isn't very modern up in the cockpit region. It's got one little Garmin portable GPS, and that's it. But, you know, the interior looks absolutely lovely. It's been redone. It's just a really good little aeroplane. I'm tall, I'm 6'2", and I sit in the front of this aeroplane with head clearance and shoulder clearance and elbow clearance and all of those other things. It's a really good deal. Now, you're probably seeing there's not a lot of room here. This is the seat all the way aft. So this seat is all the way aft, and that's so I can get into that seat. This seat goes forward. Well, that pilot seat is about as far back as I usually have it, and there's huge amounts of room in the back here. I could fit in the back at 6'2" and fit on this back seat. Yeah. So that's pretty much the outside of the aeroplane. The next step is going to be me jumping into the cockpit, and I'm going to talk about the pilot to cockpit interaction. I briefly touched on it on that viewpoint out the front of the aeroplane. It's a non-standard viewpoint where the cowling slopes away and you get a few visual illusions there. But this is very early Beechcraft, so the cockpit controls are kind of a little all over the place. They're more standard than the early Bonanzas. But where the early Bonanzas had, you know, prop and throttle controls around the wrong way and stuff like that. But you'll notice when I show it that there's a lot of controls that are duplicated that look and feel the same, which is a non-standard thing now. So let's jump out of the plane. I'm gonna pack all of my stuff into the aircraft, and we're going to fly the thing. Hopefully demonstrate some of those handling qualities, and talk about how to actually land the thing, demonstrate some stalls, some slow speed flight, and we'll come in, we'll do 1 or 2 touch or goes, and then I've got to go and do some work.
Well, welcome aboard, ladies and gentlemen. Just a nice quick little startup cycle there. Our little Beechcraft. Go ahead and load up our little av map here. So, just gone through a little cheeky startup here. We've gone ahead and locked the primer. I've got carb heat on at the moment. I'm not expecting it to actually do it, but we'll see how we go. What I do want to have a little look is, I'm just going to pull up Windy here and just check the satellite. As you can see, there's a little bit of, maybe you won't be able to see it, but there is a little bit of cloud just over the top of Northam. So, yeah, look, it isn't developing more. This is cloud cover. It's looking like it's at about 1,000 feet, a little bit below. I was hoping to get some general handling, but this might actually just be just a flight down to Beverly. I was going to do some circuits, but might need to just make an operational decision here that that's not going to happen. We'll see how we go. We'll just poke our head up into the sky and have a little look. I'm warming the aircraft up at about 1200 RPM. It's actually a really nice starting aircraft, this, with the O320 up front. I do keep the boost pump on usually for the startups. It just helps make sure that there is positive fuel coming from the tank. It's not looking too bad. It's not looking too bad. There's enough holes here for us to not really be too concerned. We'll just keep an eye out for this weather and obviously clouds. Okay, I just had to deal with some stuff there. So we're back in the aircraft. We're just warming up here at 1400 RPM. The aircraft hasn't moved for a while, so I really just like letting it run through a nice long warm-up time. The oil pressure is just off the red line, but it's always just good practice. Give the engine a chance to warm up nicely. Also lets the pilot warm up as well. I do like feeling like I do have the ability to think and fly. So, like I was saying outside, is it takes a little while to reconfigure yourself to this aircraft. And what I mean by that is it's kind of important, that's often missed in simulation, is the pilot to aeroplane interface. And that's where my hands and feet and eyes are going in the aircraft when I'm flying it normally. In this aircraft, it's somewhat standard, but also not. So what I was talking about where some of the controls are doubled is the carb heat switch is right beside cabin heat, defrost, all of these other things. Now carb heat has a slightly different feel to it, but everything is in a slightly different place. So I always take the time to go ahead and figure where I'm going to be actually moving. Now you may not see it on the camera, but right down here beside me, where the trim control is, I'm not going to be able to demonstrate too much just with this low cloud. We'll have to save that for later in the afternoon. But the trim in this aeroplane is very important. And in fact, it's a manual trim. There is no electric trim. Your hands are down here on the trim lever all of the time. The next important one is the flap lever. And the flap lever looks like a parking brake that's just beside your right leg, kind of like a Piper. And it's got a button here that will release those flaps. And down they go. The rest of the switches is the master is red, the boost pump is right beside it. All of my engine instrumentation is over near the front of my left. Engine RPM is over here on my left knee. So as the Finer Points likes to point out, that's Finer Points YouTube channel, is that 90% of flying is knowing what to look at and when to look there. And so most aircraft, engine instrumentation is over on the right-hand side, and this aircraft is over on the left. So you've got to reconfigure your brain to know where you're actually looking to get the information that you need. And it's obviously really important to know what power you're setting, especially in VFR flying, or any flying, is we need to know what power we're actually setting, and also the engine position. So in that half a second that I might look in the wrong area, I'm like, oh, where's the gauge? Is I need to reconfigure myself into this aeroplane to know where I'm actually looking for that information. And in this case, it's over on the left. Also, my suction gauge is over on the left. And then moving across the rest of the panel, the light switches over here on the right, and that's almost all of the switches in the aeroplane. There is no alternator switch, there is no avionics switch. The switches are all based on the actual units, and we can see we have a Ye Olde ADF. The intercom is over here, and it's also Ye Olde. She's quite an old machine. The rest of the cabin is pretty self-explanatory. I've got no AT sensor, we've got windows, and we've got a yoke flight control, and the yoke flight control moves quite a ways. But while I'm sitting here on the ground, I've been running on the right-hand tab. Because one of the problems with the aircraft is being able to lean forward and be able to adjust. Bits of the aircraft, it's really quite a bit of a battle. The seats are not adjustable in height, but they are adjustable forward and aft. Go ahead and confirm that seat is locked in. In this aeroplane, you'll kill yourself very quickly. Let's talk about the things that will kill you in this plane if you get it wrong. Try and take off with flap, you're going to die. If the seat isn't locked, you're going to die. If you don't set at a high density altitude, if you don't set best power with mixture, plus a little bit, you're also going to die. The climb performance in the aircraft is anemic at best. So, yeah, there's one of the things that I care about when I jump into the plane is if I do those things wrong, is that going to affect my ability to fly the aeroplane? And in this case it would. If we were up at 2,500 feet and it was 35 degrees Celsius outside, and I just went full rich, full power, I'm going to be operating the aircraft well under its best performance at height. So we obviously want to make sure that isn't the case. The mag switch is down here to my left leg as well. So I've gone on to the left hand. I'll go ahead and turn the fuel boost pump off. But I just want to see if there's any changes to the engine note or the fuel pressure that's over on the side, and there absolutely isn't. But on the ground, the POH does state boost pumps on, so I'll keep the boost pumps on until at least 2,000 feet today. I don't even know if we're going to get above 2,000 feet, so we'll see how we go. Just configuring the cockpit. So what else have we got? That's pretty much it. We're pretty much ready for the engine run-ups, taxi and departure. Windsock today we're going to be using runway 14 out of Northam. It's my least preferred runway, purely because there's not a lot of field straight ahead. So on our departure today we'll be making a left-hand turn, and we'll go from there. Just run up the engine. I'll do a brief of the takeoff. We'll get in the air, and we'll just see how the aircraft goes. So we're already at 1400 RPM, so we'll go ahead and we'll stand the power up to about 1800. I still have carb heat on. Clear that away now that we're adding power. There is 1800 RPM. I can check my EGT here. Just I want to confirm that my mixture control is working. But as I bring the mixture back, my EGT does change. So I can confirm that my mixture is working. The primer is indeed locked. Let's go ahead and check the mags. Right mag, 100 RPM drop. Left mag about 80, no difference between them. 20 RPM difference, that's all we really need. That's fine. The next thing is boost pump off while we're pulling power. Changes to the engine. Nope. Boost pump on. Let's go ahead and pull carb heat. A very distinct, about 80 RPM drop there with carb heat coming on. Go ahead and bring carb heat back in. And the RPM returns. The ammeter is charging, we're not showing a discharge. And I do have the rotating beacon and the nav lights on. I can go ahead and flick the landing lights on. There is no change in power. But all I'm trying to do is just load the aircraft up with electrical load, just to make sure the alternator is taking that load and the battery is taking the load. Transponder, we'll go ahead and just flick it onto alt now, just to lead it, and we're on 124.2 here for Northern. Everything else is looking okay, so let's go ahead and just brief the takeoff. So the takeoff in this aircraft is, the takeoff and landing is the critical stage of flight in all aircraft, but in this aircraft, absolutely particularly. Let's just talk about that as we go. So, the aircraft has a published stall speed clean, no power of 61 knots. Our liftoff speed is 5. That's a 4 knot difference between my wheels off the ground speed and falling out of the sky. So, a gust of wind, a engine failure, and all of a sudden I'm stalling and I'm slammed back into the ground. So this particular aircraft, 65, is, for me, even though it says it in the POH, is not a safe liftoff speed. So I'll actually wait until 70. And once I'm at 70, all I'm going to do is wait for the aircraft to fly. So with this airplane, I don't want to rotate. There is no rotation. But as I accelerate down the runway, I just want to raise the nose just a tiny little bit, just so I take the pressure off the nose wheel, and then I let the airplane fly. The plane will fly when it's ready for today's conditions, the weight, the center of gravity. So I don't want to rotate the aircraft as if I'm flying a fighter jet or as if I'm flying literally any other airplane. The plane will fly when it's ready. Let's do that. So I'm expecting wheels off the ground anywhere between 65 and even 72. After 70 knots, I'm not actually going to pitch. What I'm actually going to do is keep the nose at a relatively low attitude, and I want to accelerate. I want to see positive acceleration to around 75 to 80 knots. The reason for that is multiple. One, that's stall speed, but two, what is my best glide speed in this airplane? Airplane at 78 knots. Speed, any speed below 78 knots, means that my glide performance is garbage. In fact, emergency landing speed is 69 knots. So if I'm trying to put the aircraft down in an emergency, I need more than 65 knots, and I need more than 75 knots. So a good number to fly this airplane outbound is at 80 knots. It gives me some margin. It doesn't give me a lot, but it gives me a chance, a fighting chance of actually being able to recover the aircraft and put it into a field. If I'm not at that speed, I'm in trouble. So I use the runway and ground effect to accelerate the aircraft. After I'm at 80, I'll accelerate through to typically 85. So 80 is my minimum speed before I start turning in the circuit. And then once I'm happily at 80 and I'm away from the circuit, I'll accelerate through to about 85 knots. The speed control in this aeroplane is just about everything. It is just about everything, and understanding what these numbers mean, how the aircraft performs with it. So the rest of the briefing is it's going to be left-hand seat takeoff. Takeoff power looking for a minimum down the runway of about 2300 RPM over here. So we're looking for 2300 RPM. If anything goes wrong on the runway, I'm going to close the throttle, pull the mixture, I'm going to shut the aircraft down on the runway and stop on the runway. Anything goes wrong after wheels up, if there's sufficient runway, I'm going to close the throttle, land straight ahead. Anything after 100 feet, I'm going to be pitching forward very aggressively, looking straight ahead of me and making 0 turns. Maybe a turn 20 or 30 degrees left of center. That's, once I'm at 80 knots, I have more option. But until I'm at 80, I can only land straight ahead. If that means landing into a tree, I'm landing into a tree. This is me briefing them. After 80 knots, we'll accelerate to 85. Once I've seen 80, I'm going to be doing an immediate left-hand turn. There's a really good field just over to my left that I have options to get into. If I just fly runway centerline here, I end up over a whole bunch of stuff that I don't like the look of. So there's trees and all sorts of shit. So we're going to go ahead and miss all of that. And then the departure today will be a left turn. We'll depart back on upwind. So I don't want to fly away from the airfield. The airfield is safe. But while I'm below my minimum safe altitude, which call it 1500 feet, I want to be as close to the airport as I can so I have a chance to get back to an actual runway. So I'm going to go left turn for an early crosswind. and fly down the runway for an upwind departure at about 1,500 feet. That means if anything goes wrong in that time, I don't like the weather, I don't like the aircraft, I can turn around and just land straight ahead on the runway. That's all we're looking for, really, so let's go ahead and get out of here. And let's go ahead and start up this other camera now. Now, this aeroplane does burn like a dump truck a little bit. There's another flight control check. And flight controls are bullet free. Just while we're taxiing, I will go ahead and bring the carb heat on. It is relatively humid today. It is about 12-15 degrees here on the ground, but it's just enough that the humidity is high enough that a carb icing could be consideration. Trim. Actually like flying with about half a line width of trim nose forward. The reason I like doing that is if I do have an engine failure, I have the elevator authority to pitch down. As soon as I lose an engine, the aircraft wants to pitch down on its own. So, one of the things with this plane is accepting you're going to be flying out of trim quite a bit, which does mean it's quite a heavy aircraft to fly. So you have to muscle it in elevator quite a bit. Not willing to do that. This is an aeroplane for you. You can't fly softly. You can fly softly and gently with this aircraft, but you have to be willing to hold a lot of stick force. An out of trim stick force with this, meaning let's say you're doing a missed approach, you've got full flap hanging down, you go ahead, stand the power up, and you're in trim for an approach, you're holding probably 15 to 20 kilos of forward stick pressure. That's a lot. And while your other hand is doing things in the cockpit, while you're trying to trim, set power, get rid of the flaps, it's really, really quite hard to deal with. Alright, we'll go ahead and make a little radio call here. 242, we're looking at northern traffic. Musketeer, Delta Papa Bravo is entering backtracking runway 14. We'll be making an immediate left turn, climbing 1,500. We'll be departing overhead the field, tracking to the south, 1,500. Northern traffic.
Northern CTF, 124.2.
That tells me no one's made a call in the last 15 minutes. 10 minutes. Forgotten how much of a boat this thing feels. Not even a boat, there's just no suspension. And that's also one of that no suspension thing where I was talking about on the outside, we just blah 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 blah. That's why it's important with this thing. As soon as you add power and you have some elevator authority, you want to take that pressure off the nose wheel. So as soon as we're rolling down the runway, we want to just have a little bit of back pressure, not all the way to full aft. It is about neutral. I just want to have about this much pressure, and that just keeps the nose wheel just off the runway, and it'll stop me porpoising on departure. We'll close up the window. Temperatures and pressures are all looking okay. Left tank fuel boost pumps on. We'll clear carb heat and the power up. Landing lights can come on. Windsock is identified, and we'll use all of the runway available in this particular aeroplane. Literally want my main wheel just about to touch the dirt off the side of the runway. Get that nose wheel nice and straight. Wonderful. Just going to do one last flight control check. They are full and free. Rudder pedals, full and free, trim is set, flaps are away. So final check of the things that are going to give me a really bad day. Let's clear the carb heat, stand the power up. I want to see that the engine makes rated power before I go brakes release. I'm seeing 2300, 2350, EGTs indicating T's and P's in the green. Let's go ahead and go brakes release. Now there is absolutely nothing fast about this aeroplane with the way it accelerates. Here we go, speed's alive, there's 40 knots. I'm only holding this back pressure on the stick, holding the throttle, there's 55. 60. Go ahead and just add a bit more back pressure. The aircraft wants to fly. We're through 70. We're going to hold it in ground effect. There's 75. Still 75. There's 80. Now I can trim this nose up and I can accept the climb. maintaining 80 knots. You know what I mean, straight out in front of the aeroplane. There's not a lot to look at if you lose an engine here. T's and P's, I'm at 80, so I'm at my safe speed. Go ahead and start a gentle left-hand turn. That's going to put me over the top of the next field so that I can make it if I don't like it. T's and P's, all looking okay. A little bit more trim. Knots looks nice. We'll roll those wings level. But even then, with that one line of trim forward, there was about probably 8 kilos of force of me actually having to hold the nose as we accelerated. All the traffic. Musketeer Delta Papa Bravo is turning left downwind. Runway 14 will be departing on upwind. Climbing 1,500, tracking to the south. Northern. But once we're in the air and we're in trim, it's a delightful little aeroplane to fly. It is very solid. It's quite stable in roll. Getting bounced around by turbulence here a little bit. Just about to hit 1,500. Still we're well clear of these clouds. And now just going to fly the aircraft with trim. We'll go ahead and lower that nose. Go ahead and reach for the power. I want to set about 2,500 at this height. These are all looking okay. A little bit more trim as we accelerate. Now we'll go ahead and just do a full left-hand turn. And this is going to put us right over the top of the airfield by upwind departure. T's and P's all looking okay, EGP's looking okay, aircraft's happy, pilot's happy. I'm happy to turn and track towards Beverly. We can probably go up another 500 feet and still be below this cloud. Northern traffic, Musketeer, Delta Papa Bravo is overhead the field, will be departing upwind, climbing 2,000, tracking to York, Northern. Gliders are going to be happy today. The cruise climb in this aircraft does say 87 knots, 90 knots is a much easier number to deal with. Another 100 foot to go, we'll level out. You can see that my hand, I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but my hand has been down here flying the trim quite a lot, and that's purely because of the weight on the stick. I'm overhead the field, I'm above circuit height, there is no traffic inbound, there is no traffic to my left. I'm going to be making a slight right-hand turn, and we'll be tracking over to Brookton Mountain. We've got a nice little gap, now still well below the clouds. Up here, 2550. I'm going to go ahead and bring this power back just a little. Just bring some of the mixture back just a touch, just until we see that needle start to move. It's almost impossible to run this aircraft in a lean state where it'll detonate. The engine will shut down before it detonates because it's so low powered and has a very, very low compression ratio. We'll need a little bit of nose up trim. Well, going into quite a headwind here, we're getting 84 knots across the ground. So look, one of the other things about the aeroplane is just how slow it is. You ain't going to get anywhere far, but look at how much room you have for activities. There's not many GA aircraft that have this kind of cabin space. It's one of the strong points. Now that I'm in trim, I don't know if you can see, but I can fly this thing 2 fingers. Now that I'm in trim, roll control, there's like 200 grams of force to roll the aircraft left and right at 100 knots. As we fly along, I'll go ahead and show you some of the low speed hand. I'm not going to be able to do stalls from this height, but I can slow the aircraft down and just show you how much trim is required and how much stick force. So the roll control is very, very, very nice. It's very nice, it's very stable, it's an actual joy to fly. Pitch at 100 knots is it's quite responsive. So you can see there, I'm moving the stick maybe 1 to 2 centimeters aft, 1 to 2 centimeters forward, and there's quite a strong pitch response. And the force on the stick there is under a kilo. So there's not a lot of force. There's not a lot of force on the stick once we're in trim. It's the takeoff and landing, when you're flying the aircraft in an out of trim state, that's when it starts getting hit. That's all because of that giant all-moving stabilator with the balance tab on the actual tail of the machine. Because of that, it makes the flight controls very heavy. This is an interesting weather observation to see here. As you'll see, Brookton Mountain, just straight off the nose of the aeroplane, you'll see there's what's called some orographic lifting there. Is the wind is coming straight at that mountain. As it's hitting that mountain, is going up. And so you can see those clouds everywhere else around it, but there's a stronger set of clouds right above Brookton Mountain. And that's just due to some orographic lifting as the wind that I'm flying into is headwind now, it's about 12 knots. Hitting that little mountain there and then going vertical, just taking all of that nice moist air with it, going up and creating those taller clouds over there. Anyway, little aside. The aircraft, now that we're here in cruise, even though it's going to take us a million years to go anywhere, it's a very enjoyable aircraft to fly. In fact, if I go ahead and just put my hands up here, we can see just how stable the aircraft is, even in this wind. And that's due to the large dihedral, so I just got bumped a little bit there by turbulence. I can see the aircraft has started a bit of a bank to the left, but if I'm really lazy, all I have to do because of this dihedral is add a little bit of right rudder. I'm putting just the weight of my foot onto that rudder pedal. I can go ahead and return the aircraft to where I want it to go. We can also have a look at the on-trim condition. Is that what I'm going to do is I'm going to upset the aeroplane in pitch. What we want to see is this is a stability test for an aeroplane, is that if on trim condition, that means I've set the elevator for a speed, like cruise control, right? So I've set the elevator for a certain speed. In this case, I've set it to around 98 knots indicated. So what I want to see is how effective the stability in pitch aircraft is if I upset the aeroplane. So if I upset the aeroplane, it could be turbulence, it could be me. Let's upset it in a dive. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to lower the nose. When I lower the nose, what ends up happening is the aircraft speed accelerates, right? And so if the trim works, if we have a strongly stable aircraft, is the trim should bring the aircraft back to my on-speed condition through a series of oscillations. Those are called fugoids. I don't know, whatever the fucking word is. So we've gone through half an oscillation now where I pitch down, the aircraft is nosed up. What we should see is eventually these oscillations will dampen up. I'm not touching the trim, I'm not touching the stick. Aircraft should go back to an on-trim condition, being about 98 knots. So that's one whole fugoid. I think that's the right word. If it's not, whatever, yell at me in the comments. We're actually already back to an on-speed condition. So there's one fugoid there with a pitch down, and the aircraft is back to being stable. So it has a very, very strong on-trim stability, or an out-of-trim stability, meaning that the aircraft wants to return back to the state of stability that it had. And we can try that in pitching the nose up as well. So pitch the nose up, now the aircraft is going to slow down. I'm just going to control the aircraft in roll, not in pitch. Now we're going to see if it will return the aircraft back to its on-trim condition. So we've gone through half a fugoid now, but now the nose is going down, the aircraft is wanting to accelerate. As it's accelerating, the trim is going to return the nose back to where it wants to go, back to our on-trim condition. Also I need to be listening to some other radio frequency. But while the aircraft's doing its thing, you can see how stable the aircraft is. I'm not really caring about what the aeroplane's doing because it's a very, very stable machine. So that's one fugoid, one oscillation right there, one sinusoidal thingy. I think the word is fugoid. Yeah. Got a little bit of a turbulence there that bumped me a little bit to the left, so I'm just going to correct that with my feet. So I'm just using the rudder pedals there. That was one oscillation, and we're back to neutral already. Very, very, very strong in That's why the aircraft's a delight to fly, is that it wants to be an arrow. It wants to fly in a straight line where you've commanded it to go. We're probably expecting a little bit of turbulence under this thing. I'm just going to keep... Yeah, there we go, just a couple of little lateral oscillations. Nothing really crazy, but that's how easy it is to fly in cruise. That really makes it a joy. And it really is a nice aeroplane. It feels strong, it feels right. Look at T's and T's, we're looking okay. Still running off that left tank, but what I might do, just run over onto the right tank, so it's in the correct D10. Looks like it is. Up 200 feet during all those oscillations. So what other things can we do? Well, it's not as stable in roll as you would like to think, but it's very responsive. So let's have a look at its ability to return if we go ahead and bank the aircraft. So I've gone ahead and given it like a 30-degree bank angle. So this is seeing whether the aircraft wants to go into a spiral dive. So the nose dropped, wings are starting to level out on their own, and now we're going back into that on-trim condition. Might see a little bit of this sort of wallowing, and that could be mostly due to, well, I'm not controlling with my feet, so the aircraft is going in and out of being imbalanced. So it's gone to the right, now it's returned to the left. Hopefully the dihedral is going to go ahead and start catching up. You can see here there's actually no tendency to go into a spiral dive. A proper spiral dive would be seeing something like this, where the aircraft is just constantly turning, banking, and increasing in yaw. We're not seeing anything like that, so it's still stable in roll. And rudder is the same thing. We can go ahead and we can kick the rudder to the left, we can kick it to the right, and the tail of the aeroplane, there goes through 1, maybe 1.2 degrees left to right, and then the aircraft's back to being in a stable condition. So, the aircraft is a very strong flyer. Have a look out my wing here because I'm close to this airfield, but I've heard no radio calls, and the runway looks dead. I don't think anyone's going to be flying. But the next thing we'll demonstrate is, why don't we go ahead and just show some of this slow speed flight. I'll slow the air, well, you saw it without flap, so I'm going to go ahead and show it to you with flap. I'm about 10 minutes from Beverly. But as soon as I bring the power back, have a look what happens with the nose. But all I've done is change the power. Have a look what happens to the nose. This is where you're flying the aircraft with trim a lot. So while the aircraft will try and return to its on-trim condition, what would end up happening is it would keep slowly descending. So I'm just going to trim the aircraft to maintain the nose attitude.
Traffic Walker Hills, Gabriel 7060 is 3 nautical miles southwest inbound for Takeoff, Walker Hills.
Okay, so I'll set the aircraft up here at about 80 knots. I'll control that to 80 knots with attitude and power and trim. And we can just run through the same settings here. So 80 knots, it is my minimum maneuvering speed, and at this height I don't want to go any slower without flap. With flap I can come down to about 70 knots. So, but let's go ahead and have a look at the same thing with the trim stability. I'm at 80 knots, I'm in trim, I can go hands off. We can do the same thing. I'm just going to upset the aeroplane, pitch the nose down. There's half an oscillation, it's to about 88 knots. Starting to slow down, 75. I'm expecting at this slower speed it might need another oscillation or two. Just correct that roll there. There's one whole oscillation. To about 86, 87 knots. We're back at 80. It actually just went straight back. Nice and solid aeroplane. Great. Let's go ahead and show you the demonstration with flap, because this is kind of crazy with this aeroplane. Is the pitch change with flap. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to my first stage, my half stage of flap. Just watch the attitude change. My speed won't change, but have a look how far the nose goes a bit. So that's my half stage of flap. I need to go ahead and retrim the aeroplane to maintain 80 knots. I'm going to have to add about 100 RPM of power there. What I'm seeing here is the drag profile of the aircraft, is I can see how much extra power I need when I deploy flaps. So we were at about 2050 RPM, but I want to be able to maintain 80 knots with half flap. So I've had to add, it looks like about 300 RPM to maintain 80 knots. The attitude has dropped with a no. What I mean by the attitude is because we have all that extra flap hanging out, all that extra lift. The nose attitude has changed. So my attitude has changed. The alpha really hasn't. I've needed about 300 RPM to account for that
Traffic
drag.
Morgan Hills, W7060 is overhead the airfield, Morgan Hills.
But this is only half flap. We're going to go ahead. We're going to throw full flap, go ahead and have a look out the front of the aeroplane, and it feels like we're kind of flying like this. It honestly feels like we're flying like that. So we'll check the flaps, they're looking good. Here comes full flap, and there's that attitude change. And right now we feel like a wheelbarrow. I literally have half ground, half sky, which is your usual descent attitude in an aircraft like this. And let's go ahead and see how much drag these flaps have actually added by seeing how much power I need to overcome that drag. Now remember, my best glide speed is 78 knots. With flap, it's probably around 73. So what I'm trying to see here is how much power I need to maintain altitude. So we're about 75% power. So I need 75% power to overcome flap. A little bit more forward trim, just to take that pressure off the yoke. Yeah, but 2400 RPM at 1800 feet is about 70-75% power. But to also demonstrate just how draggy these flaps are, I'm going to go to full power and I'm going to try and climb. And we're going to see if the aircraft can give me any performance with full flap. This is important to note if you're going to do any go-arounds, missed approaches or anything like that. I'm at 1800 feet, I'm at 80 knots, I want to go missed. So we're going to go ahead and add full power, and we're going to try and climb. I'm going to climb at 80 knots, that's my safe speed. Oh, just pitching the nose up like that, I've already lost 5 knots. So I'm just going to go full power, and I'm probably about 150 kilos under gross weight right now. But let's see what kind of sustained climb I can get at 80 knots. That's 200 foot a minute. But I can climb out at 200 foot a minute with full flap. That's important to know if I need to go around, right? If there's trees at the end of the runway, that's a bit of a problem. Let's go ahead and see what the drag profile's like with half flap.
Traffic Morgan Hills, W7060.
As soon as I get rid of that flap,
crossing runway 07, but that should go.
As soon as I get rid of that flap, I can feel the aircraft wants to decelerate and drop. Let's see what we can get at 80 knots here with half flap.
Ground lead bound to 50.
Full power. We're just going to get rid of this excess energy. We're looking at about 500 foot a minute. And again, I'm about 150 kilos light. So the real number is...
Traffic Morgan Hills, W7060, turning downwind runway 07, that should go. Morgan Hills.
The other thing to note, as I clear those flaps away, I'm in a very out of trim state. So I was on trim full flap 8 knots. Now I'm having to hold the nose up. As I accelerate, I'm going to just, we can see if I let go of the stick, we can see the aircraft wants to go back to its on trim condition, which was 80 knots with full flap. We're not going to allow that to happen. I'm holding here about 1.5 kilos of force to hold the nose. And if I wanted to fly at 80 knots. So I can actually climb now that I've got rid of the flaps and all of that other stuff. Like, yeah, that's definitely what's happening. I'm going to need to make a radio call here in a large trim changes, also large drag changes. Why that's important is if I need to go missed. First thing, my process for going missed.
Go ahead.
is going to be apply full power, wait for positive speed. So if I'm going mist at 70 knots, I need to make sure I'm getting speed. So I will go ahead and go full power, lower the nose, leave positive acceleration. Oh my god, dude.
07.
Yes. I need to leave positive acceleration. One, because if I get rid of the flap, my stall speed, I'm going to be really close to it. And two, it is the only way that I can actually climb. So my missed approach, or my go-around procedure, if I'm right over the top of the runway, is apply full power, maintain altitude, lower the nose. I can't pitch nose up. I have to fly down the runway. As soon as I see this speed accelerating, I can clear the flaps to half. As soon as I've cleaned the flaps to half, then I can pitch at 80 knots and start getting some altitude away from the trees. If I'm not able to do that, I'm in trouble. So I have to be ahead of the aeroplane. Even though this aeroplane is really slow, I have to be ahead of the aircraft through all stages of flight, including going mid. But that's important for me coming up here because Beverly has lots of gliders. I have to give way to gliders. If I make a turn and there's a glider right in front of me, guess what? I'm going around.
Traffic Walker Hills, German 700, landing final runway 07, touching go, Walker Hills.
Okay, we'll go ahead and make a radio call here for Beverly.
Beverly, traffic, Musketeer, Delta Papa Bravo's 10 mile to the north of the field, 2,400. Be arriving overhead the field for a left turn onto crosswind. I'll be making a full stop 14, expecting time overhead. I'll call that by 3. Beverly.
So Beverly knows what I'm about to do. I don't need to tell them anything more. I'm not visual with the airfield yet, but I am visual with the town. If you're visual with the town, go, yep, I am actually visual with the airfield. So there was meant to be glider ops, I believe. I don't know if they're going up with this cloud, but I kind of expect them to be doing it. So, right, so I haven't been able to show stall or anything like that, but we're going to be able to show I could demonstrate a touch and go here, but I don't know what the traffic's doing, so the safest thing to do here is just join on upwind. That means I'm going to be able to see the runway because they're gliders, they have no engine. If they land in the middle of the runway, I need to make sure that I'm not going to land on top of a glider. So joining on upwind here, I'm expecting the wind to be straight down the runway. It gives me a chance to have a look over the airfield, see if there's tugs operating. These guys, they don't like making radio calls. I've actually got a windsock here for another small little private script. So that windsock there is showing me there's going to be pretty much straight down the runway. I'm going to be expecting a little bit of mechanical turbulence. I'm going to be expecting a bit of mechanical turbulence. The wind kind of looks like it's over from the right. There's a whole bunch of trees over the threshold of that runway on the right-hand side. So we might see a little bit of tumbling, maybe potential wind shear, which is going to be important for us to keep an eye on our airspeed control. A quick briefing of what we're going to be doing down here. We've got 1,500 metres of runway and airfield elevation 700, so we'll go ahead. We're going to do 1,700 foot circuits. I am 500 foot, well not quite, I'm 400 foot above circuit height, but we'll just maintain this altitude for upwind, just so I'm not descending being circuit height. We'll descend down over top of the runway.
Traffic Walker Hills, Jumbo 7060, turning down the runway 07, Walker Hills.
T's and P's are all looking okay, all temperature pressures are okay, we're all transponding and everything. Okay, we are visual. We want to have a good look around for little surprise white aeroplanes. Usually they're all deploying at stage, they're not actually returning unless they've had a bad flight, but I thought there'd be a few of them up right now. It looks like good glider weather. Even in this very light turbulence,
traffic Lima, November use Pullman station, drop flight number 140, expect 140,
yeah, even in this light turbulence, it's a very, very enjoyable aeroplane. don't really have to think. The plane just talks to you. It tells you what it needs, tells you what it wants. But we're about to demonstrate the hard part of the flight. So it's been about, probably been like 10 months since I've actually flown this aeroplane, maybe a little bit longer. So I haven't landed the thing. So the difference between currency and competence or something like that. I'm not very current in the aeroplane, so I've got to add a healthy dose of margin around how I'm going to fly the aeroplane.
Beverly traffic, Musketeer, Delta Papa Bravo is 3 miles to the north of the field, 2,200. I'll be joining upwind for runway 16, that'll be a full stop. Beverly.
0 to Barney, down to runway 07, 2,200, tracking west, 4 green side, 1 field north, traffic 5, 1 walker hills.
Oh, get off the fucking radio, dude! Everyone wants to feel like they're in an airliner reading back an IFR clearance. They're just flying around VFR. Too much. The parachuting, good radio call. Stop parachutes during bay. That's like 250 miles north of here. We're just picking them up because of, there's no gliders out on the runway today, so they're either all scared of flying or, I think they're all scared of flying. They don't have an engine though, so they got to come down through the cloud. They a little bit scared. They don't have any white crosses out that I can see, so it means there are no active glider operations right now. I can see the runway, so I'm just going to go ahead and reduce power, and we'll come down to our circuit height. No, I can see 2 gliders. They're just parked up beside the runway. So, with a plane like this that's very different, is I want to brief myself and just remind myself what the hell I'm expecting when I actually... and that is I'm expecting a very high stick force. So it's normal in this aeroplane to experience a high stick force. What I don't want to do is go, well, that feels weird, and let the nose go, or not apply a lot of back pressure. If I do that, I'm going to have a really bad day, because I'm going to porpoise down the runway. Next part of the briefing, as I look down the runway, I see 1, 2 gliders, no tugs. That means the tugs could be either in the air. The tugs could either be in the air, or they haven't pulled them out yet. 1700, turn power.
Beverly traffic, Musketeer, Delta Papa Bravo is overhead the field, 1,700, be joining left crosswind, runway 16, full stop, Beverly.
Alright, so they know where the fuck I am. Okay, let's go ahead and configure the aircraft. Air brakes eject undercarriage down a Bolton mixture. Probably just bump it forward just a touch, I don't need full rich. Hatches, harnesses, I'm secure, fuel is sufficient. Everything else is locked, cabin heat locked, switches, we're all on. And the windsock was identified, we're landing in the right direction. Wonderful. We're just having a good look around for any supplies. Gliders above us, over to our left. They do run left-hand circuits. And around we go. High, we'll go ahead and correct. The runway's still looking over my shoulder. Corrected that 50 feet of height loss. As I keep flying the aircraft in trim, so I'm crosswind. Having a good look that no one is joining downwind through these clouds or anything like that. We're looking okay. Then left, centre, right, over we go.
Beverly traffic, Musketeer, Delta Papa Bravo, turning left downwind, runway 16, full stop.
Okay, so print landing checks, they're all complete. Runway is still clear, windsock's still looking okay. The briefing here is I'm expecting quite a high stick force. The other thing is I want to aim a little bit short of the runway, just because of the flare in this thing. So
Traffic Lima, November India has 14.
Full flight.
Flight number 140 now.
My minimum speed on landing until landing is assured is 80 knots, and I do not pull full flap, and I'm committed to the landing. Let's go ahead, I'm going to bring the power back to about 1900, need a little bit more power than a regular aircraft. I'm going to trim the aeroplane, I'm going to go half flap, and then we're going to start our turn. That will slow us down. A little bit of extra stick force there as we come to 80 knots. I'll reset the power to maintain about that 19,000, and 80 knots is looking pretty close. That should give me about 500-600 foot a minute. We're just going to make a final call, make sure there is no one on final. A little bit more power to just rest this train. I am still a little out of trim, so let's go ahead and re-trim. This height is really nice, we're set up quite nicely. Much power. Go ahead and clear that power.
Beverly traffic, Musketeer, Delta Papa Bravo, turning, final 16, we'll stop, Beverly.
We're about 5 knots fast, we'll just reach the power and change attitude here a little bit, but all of this extra speed and energy is going to go away very quickly when I go to full flight. For in flight, I needed about 2400 RPM gain height, so if I'm at 1800 feet, we're going to be very draggy. So still at 80 knots over the fence, aircraft feels good, here comes full flap. We are committed to landing now. Someone pulls out in front of us. You can see this attitude is very nose down. To maintain that 80 knots, while I'm over the top of these trees, and I'm probably going to slow, well, I'll slow to about 75. The thing with this aircraft is it's so draggy. If I just add angle of attack or add alpha, the aircraft slows down almost right away. So I'm a little bit fast, I'll return the power a little. Watching this airspeed, very important. The transition from this really nose-down attitude into the landing flare is what captures everyone. The other thing I need on landing is just a touch of power. I want to have about 1300 RPM of power as I come over the fence. That ensures that I have elevator authority. I'm at 70 knots over the fence. We're going to go ahead and bring the power back. We're going to let the aircraft settle. There's 1300 RPM, but just have to let the aircraft settle. Let it settle. Let it settle. Holding it, so I'm still not at the landing. Still not at the landing. We got a nice little down. That's not bad considering I haven't flown the fucking thing in a bazillion years. A bit of the flap right away. It was probably a little flat. It was probably a tiny little bit flat, but we'll go ahead and accept that as a good landing. Just gentle enough to make. As our friend in the STEMI, need to figure out, are we parking there?
Beverly traffic, Golf Hotel Charlie, entering in back taxi in runway 16 to power takeoff, run-up area, Beverly traffic.
Right, let's try Mountain Goated. We made it! It wasn't too bad.
Let us know how it goes there, hey? That's Alan, by the way.